Hi everybody, I'm back. I know I had planned on a trip to the Dominican Republic, and that's still coming up, but in the meantime I've been commissioned to build a bedroom set. Now you'll notice I'm in a different location too, and this location has some unimaginable luxuries like actual electricity and running water, so hopefully I won't get too soft for you guys. I'm going to start off the project a little bit earlier than usual. Once again, I'm working with dimensional lumber. The first thing I did was head down to the lumber yard and pick up the best quality lumber I could get and bring it back up to the work site. But before I can use it, I need to let it dry a bit. Now, this process is usually called stickering up the lumber. Be sure you pile your stickers in a vertical line above those supports and put your supports roughly at 1/4 or 1/3 of the way from the ends of the boards to keep things from sagging. Once your lumber is all stickered up, you'll need to leave it for a while and let it set. Now, depending on the climate and the species of wood and how dry it was to begin with, that can be anywhere from a week to 2 years. Alternatively, you can buy kiln-dried lumber, but it's not always available in all locations, and it costs more money too. As the wood dries, there is going to be some splitting and some checking in the wood. Now, this first kind of split here on the end grain, an end grain split, happens because the ends of the board dry faster than the center of the board. Now, as the board dries, it shrinks. So this area is shrinking. This area is not shrinking as fast, so something's got to give, and you get some split at the end of the board. The faster the wood dries, the more likely you are to run into problems with end splitting and checking. The other big problem you can have when drying wood is warping. A few things you can do to help this too. Start off by stacking your lumber straight, and again, the slower you dry the lumber, the more evenly it'll dry. The thing is, warping is usually caused by inherent instabilities inside the wood. Often a knotty pine piece like this will warp right along these knots. Now, as I've said before, wood shrinks as it loses moisture and dries and seasons. And it's very important to understand how this happens in order to make the best use of your wood. First of all, in the long direction, wood shrinks very little. There's some shrinkage, but it's not all that noticeable. Where you start seeing the shrinkage is going across the board, or more specifically, you see even more shrinkage as it goes around the log. Now, that may not be obvious when looking at the top of the board, but when looking at the end of the board, you'll start to see the difference. Now, since the wood shrinks at a medium rate going across the log, a nice piece of wood like this will be the most stable because all the rings are vertical. Now, why is all this shrinkage information important to me? Well, when I go down to the lumber yard and try to pick out my lumber, I want to pick out the most dimensionally stable lumber I can for my furniture, or else it'll warp and twist. Now, the best cut is going to be what's called quarter sawn. You'll find that a 10-inch wide piece of dimensional lumber, generally speaking, is cut through the center of the log. And you can see that by looking at the growth rings here, which are mostly vertical. This type of board is likely to be far more stable than a plain sawn board from the outer edge. Now, all lumber has defects, but what you want to avoid most is twist. It's a type of warp that happens because the board itself has some inherent instabilities on the inside of the wood. Either that or someone dried it while it was under torsion. If you have trouble seeing twists in a board, get down at a low angle from the end of the board and take a look. If you still have trouble seeing it, use some winding sticks on top that'll help amplify the angle. Now, a twisted warp is the hardest thing to correct for. It still can be used if you cut the board down small enough and you're careful with your milling, but a board like this would never be useful for a long object like bed rails or something like that. If you're trying to quick dry lumber in the sun, be sure to come out and flip the top pieces over once or twice a day, at least at the beginning, or else they're more likely to warp or split.